Good evening. My name is Ibukun Emmanuel Adebayo, and I'd like to welcome us all to this evening's workshop, where we'll be discussing the EU's Digital Operational Resilience Act, DORA, and the UK's Operational Resilience Rules. This presentation is brought to us on behalf of the Ladder Back Down. Before we start, I'd just like to take us through this disclaimer. The content in this presentation has been produced for business analysts, project managers, GRC professionals, InfoSec professionals, IT auditors, pen testers, red teamers, IT professionals, and anyone who's interested in digital operational resilience. I have had a number of requests over the past few months to deliver this workshop. And I'd like to emphasize that the content that we'll be discussing tonight does not contain or constitute legal advice. Viewers who may watch this video in the future, as well as all delegates here tonight, must therefore contact their competent authority, their supervisory authority in their local jurisdiction, or seek legal advice if you have questions around whether DORA applies to your firm or the extent to which it applies to your firm. So very importantly, if you have any questions about if DORA applies to your firm, please contact your competent authority in your local jurisdiction or seek legal advice, because you won't obtain from this session tonight an indication or any advice as to whether DORA applies to your firm. The content for this presentation has been sourced from the first set of the 3 European authorities' final draft regulatory technical standards, the RTSs. The first final draft rather, was released on the 17th of January 2024, and a further draft will be released on the 17th of July 2024. Material has also been sourced from the FCA's Building Operational Resilience Policy Statement and the PRA's Supervisory Statement, titled Operational Resilience: Impact Tolerances for Important Business Services. Global regulators have started to increasingly focus on operational resilience. And if we take a look at some of these countries, we can see that Australia has provided market integrity rules, operational resilience and technological resilience rules in various markets. And Australia also, the regulators produced a discussion paper on operational risk management in banking, insurance, and superannuation industries. Canada, last October, produced draft guidelines. Hong Kong also produced a supervisory policy manual. Singapore guidelines. The USA produced exam priorities, including information security priorities, emerging financial technology and operational resilience, and last year produced sound practices to strengthen operational resilience for specific firms in the USA. So globally, an increased focus is being placed on operational resilience. According to the UK regulators, operational resilience is the ability of firms, FMIs, and the sector as a whole, the financial sector as a whole, to prevent, adapt, respond to, recover, and learn from operational disruptions. According to EBA, it's the ability of an institution to deliver critical operations through disruption. From these definitions, we may observe that the regulators understand that the sector, firms, will experience disruptions, operational disruptions. Because if a firm wants to remain in business, it has to take risks. Boards have to accept some risks because if they don't accept risks, they simply can't remain in business. A firm cannot continue in business if it's not prepared to accept any risks at all. And that's why the regulators are saying that operational resilience is the ability to continue to provide a service to consumers in the event a risk materializes. However, they're not just saying that a financial services firm should be able to continue to provide services. They're also looking at mandating firms to take preventative action to reduce the likelihood of those risks materializing in the first case. They're also mandating that we oversee the risk that our third parties may present to our financial services organizations. So third parties that provide critical infrastructure, critical applications, critical services to the sector are also inside of these regulations, in the scope of these regulations. So outsourcing, the outsourcing of material, critical services, systems, applications, all of those now come under the scope of operational resilience regulations. What is infrastructure resilience? Firms face many risks stemming from the use of infrastructure. We could have hardware faults, change projects going wrong, where a new system has been implemented, or a new system or an existing system has had changes applied. Those could give rise to technology risk or infrastructure risk. User error on our systems, power failures, data corruption, and of course, the risk of a cyber attack. As long as a firm or an individual uses the internet. They're internet enabled. That means they face the risk of a cyber attack. Infrastructure resilience is a firm's ability to retain an agreed level of service, a pre-agreed level of service to their consumers, a firm's ability to reduce business disruption and any impact and promptly recover from an adverse technology event, incident, or disaster using tried and tested recovery processes. Very often we have firms whereby backups are taken, daily backups, weekly backups, monthly backups. However, the regulations now mandate us to not only take those backups, but to also test those backups to ensure that in the event of an incident or a disaster or a cyber attack, that data would be available to be used to get the institution or entity back to where it was before the disruption occurred. So there is a mandate on organizations to test their recovery processes going forward, rather than to simply back up all this data without testing our ability to recover that data in the event of a crisis or disaster. Cyber resilience, the risk of a serious cyber attack is a major risk to the majority of internet-enabled firms globally. Again, this regulation talks about preparedness. That means preparing towards a cyber attack, hiring skilled professionals, pen testers, cyber analysts, infrastructure professionals, risk professionals, also providing cyber awareness training to all staff, including cleaners, security guards, facilities staff, ongoing periodic cyber awareness training to all staff, cyber crisis management planning and scenario testing, third-party due diligence and due care. And again, the regulators will now retain direct oversight over critical third parties that serve the financial services sector. But they would also require financial services entities to also conduct their own due diligence, information security questionnaires, for example, requesting evidence of certification and accreditation to global or industry standards, industry information security and industry information privacy standards. A cyber resilient firm conducts incident response planning and recovery testing before rather than after an attack. And that is the least a firm can do to reduce the risk to its consumers. Let's take a look at the DORA text. What is the definition of digital operational resilience? Taken from DORA Article 3, digital operational resilience is the ability of a financial entity to build, assure, and review its operational integrity and reliability by ensuring, directly or indirectly, through the use of services provided by IT third-party service providers, by ensuring the full range of IT-related capabilities needed to address the security of the network and information systems which a financial entity uses, and which support the continued provision of financial services and their quality, including throughout disruptions. So third parties, ensuring that our third-party service providers are able to support us to deliver the services to the agreed contracted level between our firms and our consumers. Digital operational resilience also involves having the full range of IT-related capabilities needed to secure our networks and information systems, including throughout disruptions, BCP, business continuity professionals, incident response professionals, red teamers, blue teamers, purple teamers, penetration testers, the full range of IT-related capabilities needed to secure our systems, to ensure that we're able to continue to provide a financial service and the services that we offer to consumers, including throughout disruptions. An operationally resilient firm will be able to recover promptly or faster than an organization which is not operationally resilient from a disruption. What is the objective? To achieve a high level of digital operational resilience for regulated financial entities. And we'll take a look at a sample of these shortly. Why DORA? One of the aims is to strengthen IT security at financial entities, including those in scope of DORA, and their critical third parties that provide critical services or support critical systems. DORA has also been brought in to make sure that the European financial sector can remain resilient in the event of a severe operational disruption, including the loss of a critical third-party provider, such as a cloud provider. Regulators will also be providing ongoing oversight to IT third-party service providers, that is the critical third-party service providers. The competent authorities, the supervisory authorities, will be providing direct oversight to critical IT third-party service providers, as well as 20 different types of financial entities. Before DORA, operational risk was solely managed through the allocation of capital, whereby firms were required and continue to be required to place capital in reserves towards the eventuality or the risk of of an incident or a disruption, major disruption, or calls from different service areas, different business units. So it wasn't just a case, and it doesn't remain a case whereby firms are required to put money aside solely for an IT incident. There are other incidents that constitute operational risks to firms. So the Capital Requirements Directive, the European Capital Requirements Directive, is one such regulation that remains today, whereby firms are required to put aside capital to manage the risk of an operational incident. However, regulators have suddenly woken up to the fact over the years, not just recently, but over the years, to the fact that placing capital in reserves is insufficient, in that that doesn't prevent an operational disruption. Capital helps to recover financially in the event of a disruption. It also means that there's money aside to help an organization to recover, including potential compensation to consumers affected by the disruption. However, with DORA and with other global operational resilience rules, the mandate is to implement policies, processes, procedures, people, facilities that will help to reduce the risk of the operational disruption from occurring in the first case, and to reduce the duration of the incident if it does occur. DORA requires, mandates, not only requires, but mandates that financial firms in scope prepare for operational disruptions, test their ability to recover from those disruptions, put in place business continuity plans, to enable them to recover promptly from an interruption, and to enable them to continue to operate, to provide a service to consumers during that disruption. And that's why this regulation has been implemented, essentially, to reduce the probability of a prolonged, severe operational disruption that impacts not solely a financial services firm, but rather the entire financial services sector in Europe. DORA supervision, we've got 3 European supervisory authorities, ESAs, that is the European Banking Authority, the European Securities and Markets Authority, and the European Insurance and Occupational Pensions Authority, which gives us an indication as to what sort of entities are in scope. DORA has 6 chapters, and we'll take a look at chapter 1, general provisions, and then we'll take a look at these different chapters here. Article 1, first of all, information and communication technology, IT risk management, which we'll be looking at shortly. The reporting of major IT-related incidents and notifying on a voluntary basis significant cyber threats to the competent authorities. Reporting of major operational or security payment-related incidents to the competent authorities by financial firms in scope. Digital operational resilience testing, that is scenario tests, and IT disaster recovery tests. These are all mandated now. Measures for the sound management of IT third-party risk. So under A, that is the obligation on the financial entity to manage the contract between itself and the IT third-party service provider. Whereas the B is about the oversight framework that the competent authorities intend to adopt to directly manage critical IT third-party service providers to the financial entities. And we won't delve into too much of the competent authorities oversight framework. That is not largely in scope for tonight's session. Chapter 6 is about information and intelligence sharing in relation to cyber threats and vulnerabilities between financial services firms or financial entities. Let's take a look at the scope of DORA. We've got some institutions listed here. We've got credit institutions, payment institutions, e-money institutions, investment firms, crypto asset service providers, central counterparties. We've also got insurance firms, occupational retirement pension providers, credit rating agencies, auditors, audit firms, IT third-party service providers, that is statutory auditors, and audit firms, IT third-party service providers. And there are more. Here are some definitions from DORA. Firms will be required to constantly obtain threat intelligence. But threat intelligence doesn't mean just subscribing to firms such as the SANS Institute or other firms to obtain that information. Threat intelligence, according to the regulations, means information that has been obtained and then aggregated, transformed and analyzed and interpreted or enriched to provide the necessary context for decision making. So an operationally resilient firm will subscribe to that threat intelligence from various sources and have their threat analysts analyzing that data and providing reports for decision makers to make informed decisions with regards to the risks faced by that individual firm, by that individual financial services firm. And using that information, using that intelligence to manage the risk of an IT-related incident or cyber threat. What is threat-led penetration testing? Now, this is one obligation whereby the regulator, the competent authority, will be telling firms that are mandated to hold threat-led penetration testing exercises every 3 years, once every 3 years. So if you're unsure as to whether you need to hold threat-led penetration testing, the sole place that you would need to go to find out that information is with your competent authority. What is a threat-led penetration test if you're required to do this? It's a framework whereby you have red teamers and purple teamers, red teamers or purple teamers and blue teamers, and they're actually taking part in tests that actually mimic real life cyber attacks against your company. This exercise is costly and it could take months unless the firm has an internal blue team, red team, purple team in place, and you do that exercise in-house. I've worked in a firm whereby this exercise was done in-house and it took months, but it was a very good experience. But don't go and start investing in this threat-led penetration testing exercise if you don't speak, if you haven't spoken to your competent authority and been told that you actually need to do this. What is IT concentration risk? Let's give an example here. If a company decides to host all its applications or systems in a single data center, to concentrate all its applications in a single data center, that action or decision has given rise to concentration risk, because in the event that that single data center goes down, the firm would be unable to operate. If all firms in an industry decide to host their critical applications within one cloud provider's data centers, again, that is concentration risk. Because in the event that that cloud provider experiences a severe disruption, none of those firms in that country or in that region would be able to operate. So again, if we look at the definition here, although it's long, what it's simply saying is that IT concentration risk means an exposure to individual or multiple related critical IT third-party service providers, whereby multiple firms are solely dependent on that single IT third party, or a single firm has all of its infrastructure and applications invested in that single third party. That is concentration risk. Let's talk about the proportionality principle. Financial firms shall implement the rules in accordance with the principle of proportionality, considering their size and overall risk profile, and the nature, scale, and complexity of their services, activities, and operations. So again, if you're not a large firm, if you're not a complex firm, if you're not a high risk firm where you're dealing in high risk activities, again, please talk to your competent authorities, but don't go out of your way to, as a small entity, try to implement DORA in the same way that a major, one of the big investment firms would do. So the proportionality principle is stated loud and clearly in the DORA text. Talk to your competent authority if you're unsure at all about anything within the DORA text regarding whether it applies to your firm or not. Let's take a look at Chapter 1 of DORA, Information and Communications Technology, IT Risk Management. What is the regulator saying? Financial institutions must establish and maintain effective risk management and governance frameworks for their IT systems, must conduct regular risk assessments and develop incident response plans and tested business continuity plans, must identify and classify IT functions, they must map scope and dependencies, conduct business impact assessments, and analyze risks. Financial institutions shall have in place internal governance. Governance is important, and senior management will bear the financial responsibility for managing the financial entity's IT risks. So it's not the IT team. It's not the information security team or the operational resilience team. It's actually the management body that shall bear the financial responsibility for managing the firm's IT risk. And so they must set clear roles and responsibilities for all IT-related functions, determine the appropriate risk tolerance level of IT risk, approve, oversee, and periodically review the financial entity's IT business continuity policy and ITDR plan, approve and review the IT audit plans, IT audits, and material modifications, allocate and periodically review the appropriate budget regarding the financial entity's digital operational resilience needs in respect of all types of resources, including training, IT risk training, and skills for all relevant staff. Approve the financial entity's policy on arrangements regarding the use of IT services provided by IT third-party service providers. All of this is the responsibility of the senior management body, SMT. And members of the management body as well need to be trained so that they understand and assess IT risks and their impact on the firm's operations. IT risk management framework. The senior management need to provide the mandate and commitment of funds, commitment of resources, commitment of time, commitment to IT risk management. Once the mandate has been received from senior management, then the risk management framework needs to be designed. And when we talk about the IT risk management framework, if your firm already has an enterprise risk management framework, then the IT risk management framework has to align with the enterprise risk management framework. Once the framework has been designed, then this is implemented, monitored and reviewed, and then we have continuous improvement. Continuous improvement, regular reviews, monitoring to see if after an incident, the framework needs to be amended, updated. Article 6 continued. Financial entities shall have a sound, comprehensive, and well-documented IT risk management framework. So nothing is in place until it's actually documented, which enables them to address IT risk quickly, efficiently, and comprehensively. The framework will include strategies, policies, procedures, IT protocols, and tools necessary to provide that protection to the infrastructure. Not only to the infrastructure, to all facilities, to provide physical protection. And then those strategies and policies, procedures, protocols, and tools that have been developed or designed needs to be deployed. And if the competent authorities request for an update on IT risks within that firm, then this should be provided by the firm. And I've worked with the UK regulators, actually, and the EU regulators previously, in a previous role, where we've been required to provide information on our risks. So this is something that is now under the DORA mandate. And will be required going forward. And as part of the IT risk management framework, financial entities other than micro enterprises shall implement an information security management system based on recognized international standards and shall regularly review it. Now, what are some international standards that we know of, or one key one? That is ISO 27001, of course. Again, if you're required to implement an ISMS, don't do this before you've spoken to your competent authority. Some firms are already ISO 27001 accredited. However, if you're not, and you're not a micro enterprise, then you are required to implement an information security management system based on recognized international standards. So talk to your supervisors, your regulators, and then that needs to be subjected to an ongoing and regular review. Financial entities other than micro enterprises shall ensure appropriate segregation of IT management functions, control functions, and internal functions, internal audit functions, according to the 3 lines of defense model, or an internal risk management and control model. So 3 lines of defense, we have first line of defense, who are actually the people who recognize, identify, and assess their own risks. Then we have second line of defense, who provide challenge, and guidance are the first lines of defense. And then we have the third line of defense that consists of audit, your internal audit teams, internal audit functions. There needs to be segregation and independence. Of these three lines of defenses and the control functions, segregation from the internal audit functions. The framework, the IT risk management framework shall be documented, as we've said, and reviewed at least once a year, and reviewed upon the occurrence of major IT-related incidents. And following supervisory instructions or any conclusions from testing exercises that you may do or from audit recommendations. So the risk management framework is not a static document whereby once it's produced, it stays the same. At least once a year, it needs to be reviewed. If there's a major IT-related incident, or if the competent authority instructs that this is reviewed or updated following an inspection, or if we've tested or done an ITDR test or a business continuity scenario test, or the auditors have recommended that we update our IT risk management framework, then that needs to be done with continuous improvement at the heart of any reviews. The idea that we continually improve as organizations needs to be embedded in our modus of operating. IT auditors need to possess sufficient knowledge, skills, and expertise in IT risk. If we hire IT auditors, they need to audit the IT risk management framework regularly, and they need to have sufficient knowledge, skills, and expertise in IT risk. Now, I'd like to just say this, that I've trained some IT auditors in the past, whereby I used to train commercially IT auditing for the purpose of passing specific IT audit examinations. And some auditors would come on that workshop from named and known and notable audit firms. Some would say, I've been in the industry literally for a month, whereby I've been hired by this firm and I've just been put on this certification training course. However, the DORA regulation, or the Digital Operational Resilience Act, requires our frameworks and our operational resilience to be audited by IT auditors possessing sufficient knowledge, skills, and expertise in IT risk. It doesn't mention anything about certified auditors. It's talking about expert IT risk auditors possessing sufficient knowledge, skills, and expertise, and the frequency and focus. So they haven't mandated a frequency for IT audits. Rather, it must be commensurate to their IT risks faced by your financial entity. After audits, a formal follow-up process must be documented in the IT risk management framework, including any rules for the timely verification and remediation of any critical IT audit findings. So if the auditors make some recommendations about critical IT audit findings, there shouldn't be a debate at that point as to how and when we're going to resolve these critical audit findings. That should all be documented in the IT risk management framework already. Here are some suggestions regarding the content of the IT risk management framework. Should include a strategy, a digital resilience strategy, explaining how the framework is to be implemented and including the methods your firm is going to adopt to address IT risk. Needs to establish the risk tolerance level for IT risk in accordance with the board's set risk appetite of your specific firm, not the risk appetite of a friend's firm or a contact's firm. It has to be according to the risk appetite of your firm's board. And I think I'd best also go back to A here. The IT risk management framework must support your firm's business strategy and objectives. So if your board reviews and updates the business's strategy every 3 years or every 5 years or every year, then the IT risk management framework has to be reviewed at the same time so that it continues to align with the firm's business strategy and objectives. It is so important, it's vital that that alignment remains. When the board sets the business strategy and objectives, the IT risk management framework also needs to be reviewed to ensure that it remains in alignment with the business strategy and objectives. The framework or the strategy, the IT risk strategy or digital resilience strategy also needs to include items listed here. A holistic IT multi-vendor strategy showing key dependencies, so multi-vendor strategy rather than adopting a strategy that may give rise to concentration risk with all your infrastructure with one provider. And with that multi-vendor strategy, there needs to be an explanation of the rationale behind the mix of third-party service providers that have been selected. Why have you adopted that strategy? Why have you chosen these 3 providers to provide reporting services, to provide infrastructure, cloud hosting services, to provide workplace technologies. There needs to be that explanation in the digital resilience strategy. Also, there needs to be an outline of how you're going to implement digital operational resilience testing, a communication strategy in case of IT-related incidents, so all of these are outlined in Article 6 of the regulations. Regular risk assessments. You can make use of or adapt your firm's existing risk analysis process. So you can adopt what you already have or adapt it, change it, tweak it to ensure that the risk analysis process that you have currently provides you with what you need to conduct regular risk assessments on your IT, information, and network assets to comply with this need for, or this obligation of regular risk assessments. Risk management, DORA, according to DORA, we need to adopt risk analysis before we implement a change to our critical assets or critical services. We need to do continuous risk and control self-assessments, and that is the first line of defense's responsibility, where they continually identify their risks, identify the relevant controls to treat the risks, and then they conduct a self-assessment as to whether the risks and controls that they've identified are adequate. That the controls, that they do a self-assessment to confirm that the controls that they've identified adequately mitigate the risk to the financial firm. Risk and controls oversight, that is done by the second line of defense, where they challenge first line on their risks identified, on their controls identified. And then you have the third line of defense, who would conduct the risk and controls audits. So risk management involves a separation of those three lines of defense, or segregation, according to the text, and then risk assessments if there is a material change in the services, systems, infrastructure, or facilities, processing information. So risk assessments after any material change is now mandated by DORA. A risk analysis of legacy critical systems. If you have Unix systems in place, and some firms do have them, you have legacy systems where the vendor doesn't release security patches anymore, then you need to conduct regular risk analysis on these. For risk management, we're also required to monitor and identify single points of failures. What are our weak spots or our blind spots? We need to monitor those and remediate those. Any vulnerabilities and anomalies also needs to be assessed, and those critical vulnerabilities and anomalies need to be mitigated as a priority. IT systems, protocols, and tools. Financial entities shall use and maintain updated IT systems, protocols, and tools appropriate to the nature, variety, complexity, and magnitude of operations supporting the conduct of our activities. They must be reliable. And capacity management is also mandated. Sufficient capacity to process the data, including during peak time, including when there are increased transaction volumes. When new technologies introduce, it must be equally reliable and it must indeed have sufficient capacity to accurately process the data. Of course, these systems, protocols, and tools must be technology resilient to deal with stressed market conditions or other adverse situations. So during a disruption, these systems must be technologically resilient enough to handle those stressed market conditions or those disruptions. Must continually identify all sources of IT risk, must review at least yearly the risk scenarios, stress tests, cyber risk scenarios, IT disruption scenarios. Risk assessment upon each major change in the network. So before a change is applied, a major change in the network or on an information system, critical information system, then a risk assessment should be performed with test plans, backout plans presented to the change board for review before the change is implemented. Identification of all IT systems accounts, the mapping of physical equipment as well, physical information assets, and any interdependencies. That's so important. Documentation of all processes dependent on IT third-party service providers and any interconnections with IT third-party service providers as well. All of these should be documented, identified for us, and then documented. If you don't know what you have, you can't protect your firm from risk. So identifying and documenting all these processes, all these systems, all these interconnections is mandated. Maintain and regularly update relevant information asset systems, relevant inventories. Specific IT risk assessment on all legacy IT systems once a year, especially before and after connecting old and new technologies, applications, or systems. So that's important. Where a new system is connected to an old system, or a new application is installed on old infrastructure, then there needs to be a thorough risk assessment, a specific risk assessment. So how do we identify and classify IT functions? We develop an asset inventory, identify and remediate any unknown or untrusted assets. If you identify that this asset is unknown, has no name, has no number, just found this on our network, then that should be noted down for action, basically. Identify, find out what that asset is, and then remediate it. In some cases, that would require a removal of that asset from the network. Identify systems underpinning critical business functions. That is so important. Identify any systems underpinning critical business functions. So if you're an investment bank, for example, identify systems that underpin the trading activities of the firm. If you're a financial entity that provides mortgages, then identify the critical systems that underpin your mortgage service. Identify any third-party connections and then provide an asset inventory map. To the business. Protection and prevention. To protect or to adequately protect the IT systems and to enable your business to respond decisively and thoroughly to an incident, continuous monitoring needs to take place of the functioning of the IT systems and tools, especially your business continuity systems and tools. If you've got redundant servers in place, redundant data centers in place, to enable your organization to recover promptly in the event of an incident, then that data center, that secondary data center, needs to be monitored continuously. That redundant server or that secondary server also needs to be monitored and switched on periodically, tested essentially. IT security tools, policies, and procedures need to be implemented, if not already in place. Entities should design, procure, and implement IT security strategies, policies, procedures, protocols, and tools that aim at ensuring the resilience, continuity, and availability of IT systems and maintaining high standards of security, confidentiality, and integrity of data, whether at rest, in use, or in transit. What are we alluding to there? Okay, I can see that someone's already typed encryption. That's correct. Encryption. So we need to have a data encryption procedure or protocol and tools that enable the encryption of data, whether at rest, in storage, in use, or in transit. So here we've got the requirement number 3, must ensure that the security of the means of transfer of information is guaranteed. So we've talked about encryption there. Minimize the risk of corruption or loss of data, unauthorized access. Anything that could hinder the continued activity of critical services. The prevention of information leakage, and ensure that adequate record keeping takes place. Information security policies needed, defining rules of the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the company's IT resources, data, and information assets, and critically or vitally, the consumer's IT resources, data, and information assets. It's vital that the consumers, customers, clients' information and data is protected. So sound network and infrastructure management policy, procedures, automation to enable the rapid isolation of information assets, affected information assets in the event of a cyber attack. So many tools out there and many procedures that we can use to segregate or isolate affected information assets before a cyber attack and during a cyber attack. Segregation is so important to reduce the risk of a cyber attack impacting upon our critical systems. So there's all of these strong authentication mechanisms, multi-factor authentication, ensure that our cryptographic keys are not stored in the cloud, for example. If we've got our data encrypted in the cloud, making sure that those keys are not stored in the cloud with that data. Having data classification policies and risk assessment processes, IT change management procedures and policies and controls, including tests and backup plans. Patch management, that's also one of the mandates of DORA, to protect and prevent or reduce the risk of an IT or cyber disruption. Again, it's talking about compartmentalization, segmentation of the network, or our infrastructure in a way that allows it to be instantly cut off, where we can instantly cut off or switch off access to a segment of our network to reduce the risk of malware spreading to that network. Or indeed, to reduce the risk of that malware spreading to a third party that's connected to us. There must be specific procedures for emergency changes, because if an emergency change is required, in many instances, there may not be time for the formally documented approval, change approval process to be followed. But there must be a formally documented procedure for emergency changes as well, which may include the point that an emergency change should be applied, but once it's applied, then approval needs to be obtained for a change, for that emergency change that has already been applied. So specific protocols documented as part of the IT risk management framework for emergency changes and normal changes as well. How do we map scope and dependencies? Well, we identify the scope of our critical IT functions. Which IT functions are critical to the delivery of our critical services? Then we map all the dependencies of our critical IT functions, including our facilities, our staff, our third parties, locations. All of these need to be mapped, and then we identify and update that map following any material changes to these critical IT functions and dependencies. Financial firms should have in place procedures to promptly detect any anomalies, including IT network performance issues, IT-related issues, cyber attacks, and to identify all potential material single points of failure. All detection mechanisms should be regularly tested, and we shouldn't just have detection mechanisms, there should be alerts so that when an anomaly is detected, IT is alerted to do something about the anomaly that's been detected, or the issue that's been detected, or the incident. And IT would be required to define the alert thresholds and criteria so that they're not constantly receiving false positive alerts. Financial firms shall devote sufficient resources and capabilities with due consideration, of course, to their size, business, and risk profiles, to monitor user activity, occurrence of IT anomalies and IT-related incidents, in particular cyber attacks. Cyber attacks shouldn't take your firm unawares. You shouldn't be caught unawares. If you've got adequate monitoring and alerts in place, configured, then you should be notified in good time to enable your firm to stand up its incident response team, or in some cases, its crisis response team, crisis management team. Financial entities shall have in place systems that can effectively do reconciliation, that is, check trade reports for completeness, identify omissions and obvious errors, and request retransmission of any such erroneous reports following an incident or in real time or business as usual, or following a cyber attack. Systems that can reconcile trade reports, check for completeness, identify omissions and obvious errors, and request retransmission of any such erroneous reports. Towards response and recovery, financial entities shall put in place a dedicated and comprehensive IT business continuity policy. So again, if you don't plan to continue your business before a disaster or before an incident occurs or before a crisis occurs, then it would be difficult to think of things on the fly, essentially, when such an incident does occur. That's why you're required to put in place a dedicated and comprehensive IT business continuity policy and document these plans. And the main aim is to ensure the continuity of the firm's critical functions. Business continuity is not limited to cyber and IT incidents. We all remember the recent pandemic, which doesn't seem as recent as it actually was. But firms with a business continuity plan and a pre-existing business continuity plan were able to swing into motion as soon as the pandemic hit us. As far back as 2009, when I was on a senior leadership team in a previous employment, that's many years ago now, but when I was on that senior leadership team, each business area was responsible for developing its own business continuity plan. And I remember at the time, the pandemic we were looking at was bird flu or swine flu. But I was responsible for preparing an IT business continuity plan and information security. There was nothing known as cybersecurity back then, but an IT information security and IT disaster recovery business continuity plan for the eventuality of an interruption, including considering what the impact of a pandemic such as swine flu or the bird flu would have on the IT team and IT's ability to continue to support the business back then in the event of a pandemic, essentially. So whenever we're doing business continuity, IT business continuity, or any other business functions business continuity, we always need to look at the risk of if our staff are unable to come in. What would happen if another pandemic were to strike and your IT team can't come in, whereby you've got redundant systems, you've got redundant applications, you've got everything documented, but your staff can't actually get in and they can't dial in remotely, or they're sick themselves. So IT business continuity has to take a lot into consideration, but for the purpose of DORA, these are the aims of the IT business continuity policy. To ensure the continuity of the financial entity's critical functions, to quickly respond to and resolve all IT-related incidents, including cyber attacks, in a way which limits damage and prioritizes the resumption of activities and recovery actions. Activating promptly dedicated plans, and that includes recognizing very promptly that this is an incident. Or in some cases, recognizing very promptly that this is a crisis. Estimating preliminary impacts, damages, and losses, and setting out communications and crisis management actions to ensure that updated information is transmitted to relevant internal staff, external stakeholders, and reported to competent authorities. So all of these can be read under Article 11. Implement an associated IT disaster recovery plan, which should be subject to independent audit reviews by internal audit, external audit as well. Ensuring that there are tested IT business continuity plans with regards to critical or important functions that have been outsourced or contracted through arrangements with IT third-party service providers. Again, when I was in a previous workplace, what I used to do is that I used to host a 6-monthly workshop, not a workshop specifically, but a session, a meeting with third-party providers where we came together rather than approaching each third party. I would just have half a day, 3 hours with our critical third-party providers, and we'd talk through our agreed approach to ensure that in the event of a crisis, that we would receive the level of service documented in our contract from these third parties. I also made sure that I let them or made them aware as to any changes in our business strategy. So we put in place, maintain, and periodically test appropriate IT business continuity plans, notably with regard to critical or important functions outsourced or contracted through arrangements with the IT third-party service providers. Try and partner with those IT third-party service providers. We partner with them. Rather than just call on them when there's an incident. We need to test the IT business continuity policy and the IT disaster recovery plan at least yearly and after substantive changes to the IT systems. test the crisis communications plans that have been established, including the testing plan scenarios of cyber attacks and switchovers between any primary IT infrastructure and the redundant capacity, testing of backups and redundant facilities as well, regularly review the business continuity policy and IT disaster recovery plan. If we've done any tests and recommendations have been made following those tests, or recommendations have been made following an audit check or a review from our competent authorities. Have a crisis management function. So that we have clear procedures to manage internal and external crisis communications. Whenever an IT business continuity policy or IT disaster recovery plan is activated, this is not a test now, but whereby there's a real crisis or business interruption or disaster, then records need to be maintained during the event, during the disruption, and these records should be readily available for inspection by the competent authority if they ask for them. And the competent authorities would require copies of the results of the business continuity test or similar exercises performed during the period under review. And if there are any costs or losses caused by IT disruptions and IT-related incidents, and that could include compensation to clients, then these need to be reported to the competent authorities. Those costs could include direct costs to the clients as a result of them being unable to complete their activities that they've been contracted, that they've received a contract that your firm would deliver on their part. So any financial costs and losses caused by IT disruptions, IT-related incidents, fines, direct costs, these all need to be reported to the competent authorities, to your competent authority. Incident response planning. Update the firm's existing incident response plan to align with new operational resilience requirements, including major incident identification process, impact analysis, and evaluation of the applicable timeframe of the event, including any regulatory notification requirements. The incident response plan also needs to include a method or a time when the business continuity plan needs to be activated. The incident response plan also needs to include a communications plan for regulators, consumers, employees, and third parties. The BCP, Business Continuity Plan, must be developed after a business impact assessment. The BCP should outline the steps that need to be taken to ensure the business's critical operations continue to function through and after the disruption. It's not just the business's critical operations, or the systems rather, but also the critical business services need to continue to function whilst the IT disruption or disaster is ongoing. The business continuity plan should be tested after a major change like the incident response plan, a major incident, or at least annually, and all employees should be trained in BCP, business continuity rather, and in what to do during a major incident. And that training should be provided at least yearly. Business impact assessments. It's up to the firm to establish recovery time objectives. That is, how long should it take for IT to recover these critical business systems in the event of a disaster? How long should IT take to recover this critical business service in the event of a disruption? Annual disaster recovery tests are mandated under DORA. Regular scenario tests of different scenarios that could cause a disruption to that financial firm is also mandated. From these, you'd be able to identify what your business or what impact an interruption would have upon your business's critical services, and how long IT is required to take as a maximum to recover those critical systems that support the critical services. Backup policies and recovery methods. The aim is minimum downtime and limited disruption during an incident, event, or a crisis. The backup policy to enable that minimum downtime and limited disruption should therefore specify the scope of the data that is subject to the backup and the minimum frequency of the backup, which should be based on the criticality of the information that is being backed up, the criticality to the services. How important is that information to the critical services that we provide as a financial firm? The backup policy should also contain recovery methods as to how we're going to recover this data in the event of a disruption or incident, and how we're going to test this recovery method as well. Here are some rules on the backup and restoring of data. In the event of an incident, when restoring backups using your own systems, you should use IT systems that have an operating environment, so could be segregated, different from the primary environment, that is not directly connected with the latter, and that is securely protected from any unauthorized access or IT corruption. So you can't just restore data back onto the same system that has been compromised or that is down, essentially, or that has experienced a failure. Recovery plans should enable the recovery of all transactions at the time of disruption. So the recovery point objective should be to recover all data up until the point whereby the systems went down, or whereby the incident occurred, or whereby the business disruption started. That should be the recovery point objective contained within the business or the backup policy. That all data should be, all transactions should be recovered to the point at which the interruption or disruption occurred. Redundant secondary IT capacities equipped with resource capabilities as well, and functionalities that are sufficient and adequate to ensure the business continues to function during a disruption, or that critical business services continue to function during a disruption. Financial entities, again, this is about third-party oversight, ensuring that their third-party providers maintain at least one secondary processing site, which should be located at a distance from the primary processing site, to ensure that it has a separate risk profile to the primary processing site, and to reduce the risk of contagion or a spread to that secondary site in the event of a disruptive incident. The secondary processing site shall be capable of ensuring the continuity of critical services in the same manner as the primary site is. If it's not a mirror of the primary site, it needs to be able to provide the same level of services necessary to ensure that the financial entity is able to continue to perform its critical operations within the recovery time objectives. That means that the secondary site needs to be up and running within the recovery time objectives set in the business continuity plan. The secondary processing site should also be immediately accessible to the financial services firm staff to ensure continuity of critical services in case the primary processing site has become unavailable. Now, when we talk about immediately accessible, nowadays, with a lot of data being stored in the cloud, this doesn't mean that the data center should be physically accessible. Rather, it should be logically accessible, so including remotely. And this could be managed by having, if you still keep your data in data centers, having a secondary hot site that is a mirror of the primary site, but it is constantly up all the time. And you've got cluster servers, and you've got constant real-time replication between both servers. But the risk of that, of course, is that in the event that the primary system is impacted with this disruption, let's say it's malware or ransomware or whatever, then the secondary server, if it's constantly up and receiving real-time data from the primary one, then that raises the risk of instant contagion or an instant spread of the malware or ransomware to the secondary site. So it must be immediately accessible to the financial services firm, to your firm, to ensure the continuity of critical services in case the primary processing side has become immediately available or immediately accessible remotely in many instances. When determining the recovery time objective and recovery point objective for each function, for each critical service, then consideration needs to be made regarding the potential overall impact on market efficiency. And whatever the case, in extreme scenarios, the agreed service levels that you've made with the consumer, with your client, with your customer needs to be met. When recovering from an IT-related incident, as we've said just now, financial entities shall perform multiple checks, including reconciliations, to ensure that the level of data integrity is of the highest level, including when reconstructing data from external stakeholders, to ensure that if your system has gone down and your third-party system hasn't gone down, when your system comes up, there needs to be this reconciliation to make sure that when the third party starts sending you data, because your system is now up, that data, that there's no corruption, there's no missed transactions, and that things are really genuinely back to normal. Learning and evolving. Firms shall have in place capabilities and staff suited to their size, business, and risk profiles to gather information on vulnerabilities and cyber threats, IT-related incidents, cyber attacks, and analyze their likely impacts on your firm. That is so important, that your threat intelligence staff are able to analyze, to gather that information on vulnerabilities, cyber threats, etc., and analyze the likely impact on your company. Firms shall put in place post-IT related incident reviews after significant IT disruptions, analyzing the causes, identifying required improvements to the IT operations or within the IT business continuity policy, including conducting a thematic review and ensuring that lessons are learned from previous incidents to improve your company's operational resilience. Firms shall communicate major changes to the competent authorities. Post-IT related incident reviews will determine whether the established procedures were followed and if the actions taken were effective, including the speed in responding to security alerts and assessing the impact of IT-related incidents and their severity, the quality and speed in performing forensic analysis. How well did we escalate the incident within the firm? How quickly did we identify the nature of the incident? Was this a cyber attack? Was it a ransomware attack, a DDoS attack? Was it a systems failure with our vendors? The post-IT related incident review shall also take into account and report on the effectiveness of internal and external communications during that incident. Any findings from those lessons learned should be used to review relevant parts of the IT risk management framework. And there should be some analysis of frequent IT risks and incidents, the types and magnitude of IT-related incidents, in particular cyber attacks and their patterns, to enable your firm to understand the level of IT risk exposure and enhance cyber maturity of your firm. IT security awareness programs, digital operational resilience trainings, compulsory modules in your staff annual training schemes, applicable to all employees and senior management staff, including tailored training for different levels of staff. Monitor relevant technological developments on a continuous basis. Keep abreast of the latest IT risk management processes. And make sure that all current or new forms of cyber attacks are also being countered effectively within your firm, because cyber threats evolve constantly, they change. Communications. As part of the IT risk management framework, there should be in place crisis communication plans which enable responsible emphasis on the word responsible disclosure of IT-related incidents or major vulnerabilities to clients and counterparties, as well as to the public as appropriate. You can't simply take all your vulnerabilities and simply go and say, here they are, to your clients' accountabilities, as well as to the public. That's why the word responsible and the separate word as appropriate is included here. Just as you wouldn't take your IT risk log and share that with everybody within your company or everybody within IT. You wouldn't share your IT risk log with everybody or your IT audit report with everyone in IT or everybody in the cyber team. The same applies to communications or major vulnerabilities. We responsibly disclose those or our IT-related incidents to clients and counterparties, as well as to the public. Having trained media and public spokespersons for IT-related incidents. I often talk about a CEO of a large investment firm, whereby years ago, they experienced a cyber attack and the CEO went on the news and gave a really assured briefing to the media, providing the public with assurance that everything was under control. To the contrary, another CEO went on TV and did not give an assured response to the public when faced with a cyber attack. The impact on their company was that their share price crashed. And as at last year, their share price still hadn't reverted to where it was about 7 years ago or so, or 8 years ago, when they experienced that cyber attack, whereas the first CEO that went on there and gave an assured performance ended up with many members of their information security community not actually having been aware that they'd experienced an attack for years. Many members of the public didn't know that they experienced an attack. So it's essential that at least one person in the firm is tasked with the communication strategy for IT-related incidents, and they're able to fulfill the role of a public and media spokesperson for that purpose. And when implementing communication policies for staff and for external stakeholders, communication policies for staff should consider the need to differentiate between staff involved in the IT risk management, in IT risk response and recovery, in IT disaster response and recovery, and staff that simply need to be kept informed of an incident. Article 15 is largely to do with the 3 ESAs, the European Supervisory Authorities. That is the 3 that I mentioned at the beginning of this session. They're responsible for developing draft regulatory technical standards. And if we take a look down this list, they'd be prescribing how the IT security policies, procedures, and tools shall include the concept of security by design, whereby security is designed into the network at the beginning of the network being designed, before the network has actually been built. So security by design is about ensuring that security is considered and drafted in to the requirements document at the design phase, rather than after the product has been built and it's too late to actually add security to the design or the development of that, or the building of that network. So the 3 ESAs would be responsible for all of these actions. Specify further the components of the IT business continuity policy. Specify further the testing of IT business continuity plans. Specify further the components of the IT disaster recovery plan. DORA simplified risk management. I've put a note here that you need to read Article 16 of the DORA text for a list of firms that are exempted from Article 1 to 15, and seek your local competent authority or legal counsel's advice as to whether these exemptions apply to your firm. And here's what is mandated from exempted firms. Exempted firms are required to put in place and maintain a sound and documented IT risk management framework. So unlike firms in scope of DORA, exempted firms are required to put in place and maintain, still required to put in place and maintain a sound and documented IT risk management framework. Still required to continuously monitor the security and function of all IT systems, minimize the impact of IT risks. So all of these listed requirements are for exempted firms, those firms exempted from Article 1 to 15. We're on Article 16 now. All of these actions that exempted firms are required to comply with are good practice. Good practice and still mandated, still required of firms that have been exempted from Articles 1 to Article 15. But Article 16 applies to all. Again, this is for the ESAs. So this is nothing to do with firms, financial services firms. It is for the ESAs. Let's go to chapter 2. So we've talked through chapter 1, which is on the ICT risk management. Chapter 2 of DORA is about the reporting of major IT-related incidents and notifying the competent authorities on a voluntary basis of significant cyber threats. Financial entities shall define, establish, and implement an IT-related incident management process to detect, manage, and notify IT-related incidents and put in place early warning indicators as alerts. So you may think that sounds familiar to a previous article that we've read. Yes, that's correct, because all of these chapters and regulations are related. They're interrelated. Financial entities shall establish appropriate processes to ensure a consistent and integrated monitoring, handling, and follow-up of IT-related incidents to make sure that root causes are identified and eradicated to prevent the reoccurrence of such incidents. What are early warning indicators, by the way? Let's just give an example of an early warning indicator. If an employee is suddenly observed to be sending loads of company emails to their personal email address because there are no controls in place to stop them, that could be an early warning indicator that that employee is about to leave. So early warning indicators are indications that a certain action is about to take place or may be about to take place. If your system suddenly starts slowing down considerably, and IT review logs, and they suddenly notice a 50% increase in traffic to that system, then there may be suspicions that the network or that system may be about to experience a DDoS attack. That is an early warning indicator or indication that that system, that increased volume in traffic, may be an early warning indicator that that system is about to be attacked. So here the requirement is to set alerts and thresholds, monitoring thresholds. One could simply say that if our systems experience a 50% increase in traffic or 60%, 70% increase in traffic, then that alert should be sent to IT to enable us to make sure that we're not about to be attacked, that that's not legitimate traffic, to identify whether all that traffic that is coming to our router or to our systems is actually legitimate traffic. So they put in place early warning indicators as alerts, monitoring root causes identified and eradicated, IT-related incident management process, established procedures to identify, track, log, categorize, and classify IT-related incidents according to their priority and to the severity and criticality of the services impacted. Assign roles and responsibilities for activation for different IT-related incident types and scenarios, communications plans, reporting of IT-related incidents to relevant senior management at the right timescales agreed, establish IT-related incident response procedures to mitigate the impacts and ensure that service resume operations securely in a timely manner. If those systems and services haven't been secured, then we need to make sure that they remain off the network until such a time as we can evidence that they have been secured and that we wouldn't be reintroducing a new threat to our network by bringing that system back online. Classification of IT-related incidents. Your firm will have a matrix, a risk matrix. And financial entities shall classify IT-related incidents and determine their impact based on some of the following criteria: the number of users or financial counterparts affected by the disruption caused. Consideration also needs to be made as to whether the IT incident has caused reputational damage. Another criteria for classifying IT-related incidents is the duration of the incident, including service downtime, the spread, the area spread, especially if it affects more than 2 member states in Europe. The data losses that have occurred, is it integrity loss, confidentiality loss, or availability loss? The severity of the impact of the IT-related incident on the firm's IT systems, the criticality of the services affected, and the economic impact of the incident. These are criteria under which we could use to determine the impact of the incident, of the IT-related incident. Notification. So here are some materiality thresholds which we need to use to determine what is reported to the competent authorities. Here are the materiality thresholds for determining IT-related incidents which are subject to the DORA reporting obligations. Number 1, an impact assessment. What sort of clients, counterparties, or transactions have been affected? Again, the area spread, reputational impact, service downtime, duration, data losses, economic losses. So this is just a summary of some sort of the previous slide. Article 19, financial entities shall report major IT-related incidents to the relevant competent authority within the time limit specified. Incident reports should be produced using the competent authority's issued template and submitted to them. The report should include all information necessary for the competent authority to determine the significance of the incident and assess any possible cross-border impacts or sector-wide impacts. And if a major IT-related incident has had or may have an impact on the financial interests of service users and clients, then financial entities shall, without undue delay, inform their service users and clients about the major IT-related incident and shall as soon as possible inform them of all measures which have been taken to mitigate the adverse effects of such incidents. This is similar to the data privacy regulations. In the EU, the GDPR, in the UK Data Protection Act 2018, these are similar notification mandates and obligations to our clients, to our consumers or customers. Here are the timeframes for which incidents should be reported to the relevant major IT-related incidents, should be reported to the relevant competent authority. An initial notification should be made without delay, but no later than the end of the business day that the incident occurred. Or if an incident took place later than 2 hours before the end of the business day. So let's say that a firm is open from 9 till 6. A financial services firm is open from 9 till 6. And an incident takes place at 4:30 p.m. or after 4 p.m. Then that incident should be reported not later than 4 hours from the beginning of the next business day. So not later than 1 p.m. the next day. But if the incident took place between 9 and 3:30 or so, then that incident needs to be reported that same business day, at the end of the business day. Or if there are no reporting channels available, then the incident should be reported as soon as the reporting channel becomes available. An intermediate report then needs to be provided no later than 1 week after the initial notification. And if a relevant status update is available, this needs to be provided to the regulator. And then if the regulator or the competent authority, rather, requests for a status update, this needs to be provided to them within the timelines that they specify. And a final report, once the root cause analysis has been completed, regardless of whether the mitigation work has taken place to bring those systems up or not, regardless of whether those mitigation measures have been completed, a final report needs to be sent to the competent authority, and this needs to be sent not later than 1 month after sending the initial report. So initial notification without delay, but no later than the end of the business day, or in the case of an incident that took place later than 2 hours before the end of the business day, then not later than 4 hours from opening time the next day. An intermediate report a week later, and then a final report maximum of 1 month after sending the initial report. This is for ESAs again, the European Supervisory Authorities. The competent authority will acknowledge receipt and provide all necessary feedback or guidance. They shall report yearly on an anonymized and aggregated basis on IT-related incidents and notifications received from the competent authorities. They shall issue warnings and produce high-level stats to support IT threat and vulnerability assessments. This is again the ESAs. They'll be establishing the contents of the reports, determining the time limits for the initial notification, and for each report, establish the content of the notification for significant cyber threats. They've actually done this item B in terms of determining the time limits for the initial notification and for each report. This was done in January 2024, but Article 22 has still remained within the text of the regulation. So here it actually says, so we understand this, that they will develop common draft regulatory technical standards by July the 17th, 2024. They created some technical standards in or on January 17th, 2024, including the time limits. But then they still need to complete that work by July the 17th, 2024. So I've written here just a slide, Articles 21 and 22, the ESA responsibilities. So let's take a look at IT-related incidents management, classification, and reporting. We need to develop a communication strategy for the disclosure of IT incidents. We need to classify incidents. We need to record all IT-related incidents and significant cyber threats. Document the incident or threat, its severity, the impact on operations, and any follow-up actions taken. Rapidly report major IT incidents within the regulatory timelines as requested. Voluntarily report significant cyber threats and include KPIs and key risk indicators. Here, where I've said develop a communication strategy for disclosure of IT incidents, this is disclosure of IT incidents to our internal and external stakeholders and clients, not to the regulators. The communication strategy to the regulators is determined or has been determined in January this year in the RTS, which simply states that we provide that notification, immediate notification on the same business day as the incident, unless it occurred less than 2 hours before closing time, in which case we need to provide that notification to the regulator within 4 hours of opening the next day. A week later, we provide intermediate notification, and by the end of 1 month, within 1 month of having provided the initial notification, we need to provide the final report on what actually happened and what we've done to mitigate the incident, including anything that we may have done, any notifications that we've provided to our consumers or clients, and any compensation that we may have paid, and any preliminary estimates of costs that we've incurred as a result of the incident. We'll take a break now, and then we'll resume chapter 3 in about half an hour. So please don't go away. Return within half an hour, and we'll resume chapter 3.